Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games. Today we have another top 10 list for you all, or I should say we have another top 5 list for you all. Today I'm going to share with you guys my top 5 board games with a Game of Thrones theme. These are games that are based off the popular television show Game of Thrones, or more often than not based on the novels, the series of novels by George R.R. Martin, A Song of Ice and Fire. And this is a very popular intellectual property as far as the mainstream is concerned, and lots of board games have been published over the years capitalizing on this popularity. And I enjoy the intellectual property as well, and thought I would share with you my 5 favorites. So without any further ado, let's get straight to the list with my number 5 Game of Thrones themed board game, and that is A Hand of the King, or The Hand of the King. And this is by Bruna Cathala, and it's a small box game, and it's a very simple game. This is an abstract game in nature. You're gonna shuffle these cards that consist of a bunch of different characters, a bunch of different personalities from the Game of Thrones, and they're divided into all of the different houses. You got House Stark and Baratheon and Lannister and Targaryen, and you're gonna shuffle these cards, and you're gonna create a grid, 5x5 grid, I believe it is, and flip them over, and these cards will be there. And some of the houses have more characters than other. They're not exactly created equal. And then you have this Varys card. Varys is a very popular character from the show and from the novels. And basically, players are going to be moving this character up and down along the columns and the rows of this grid, and they can move them as far as they want, as far as he wants, and then they're going to capture or acquire the card that this character Varys lands on. And basically you're trying to have a set collection. You're trying to collect as many of these different character cards as possible within the respective houses, and once a house runs out of all their cards, whoever has the most cards from that respective house is going to get a banner for that particular house, right? And eventually the game runs out of all the cards, or all the houses are represented, or there are no more legal moves, kind of like chess, a little bit of a stalemate. And whoever has the most banners at the end of the game is the winner. Again, very simplistic, very abstracted, not necessarily a thematic game. This could be any intellectual property and it will feel just the same. But for now, it's my number 5 Game of Thrones themed board game, A Game of Thrones Hand of the King. Now we move on to my number 4. And from this point forward, we're starting to talk about games that feel a little bit more thematic, more true to what's actually going on in the story. And my number 4 is a Game of Thrones Oathbreaker. And Oathbreaker is a party-style game for anywhere from 5 to 8 players. And basically, one player, or in the case of an 8-player game, 2 players are going to take on the role of the king, or the king and the queen. And all of the other players are going to be the subjects of the queen. And they all have different characters representing very important figures among the different houses. So each house actually has 2 characters you can pick from. You've got these little player boards here, and they're double-sided. So for example, for House Stark, you could be either Eddard Stark, or you can be Arya Stark. For the Greyjoys, you could be either Asha here, or Yara Greyjoy, or Theon Greyjoy. And as you can see, the art is based off the Game of Thrones television series. So these are stills for that. And basically, each player is playing the loyal subjects of the king. Pretending to be loyal, I should say, because you're going to have 2 types of players. You're going to have players who are disloyal to the king and players who are loyal to the king. So you're going to have conspirators and loyalists. And nobody's going to know who exactly is on their team. The king especially is not going to know who's on their team. But at the beginning of the game, each player is going to be dealt a loyalty card telling them whether or not they're a loyalist or a conspirator. Each player is also going to get a hidden objective, because one of the things that players are trying to do is they're trying to acquire these different cubes that represent different aspects of power or politics. And they're trying to get a certain amount of those cubes based on their hidden objective. And what happens is each round, a certain amount of missions are randomly dealt out and placed on the board. And players have to collectively accomplish playing down particular symbols from these cards over here. And these cards have different symbols representing different things. You have these skulls here which are actually bad. They represent failures, and if you're a conspirator, you want to place down skulls on these different missions. You've got swords, you've got ravens, and other symbols. And players are trying to play particular symbols down on the missions in order to help them succeed or fail. Very similar to the game Resistance. The players are placing down the cards face down, and then at the end of the round, they will reveal all the face down cards and see whether or not missions fail or pass. And the king has no idea who played what. He is paying attention, or she is paying attention, watching what takes place, watching the body language and what people say, what betrays them. But at the end of the day, they do not know. And what's interesting is that at the end of each round, the king player gets to place down cards that show whether or not he thinks a player is a loyalist or a conspirator. And at the end of the game, for each correct prediction, they're going to advance one of the cubes that represents the king's objectives around this score track. However, for each one that is wrong, each guess that he makes that is wrong, he's going to advance the corruption track. And the corruption track is what the conspirators want to advance. So many different things that are going on. Players are going to be contributing to certain missions because they correspond to their objectives, not necessarily because they correspond to their loyalty. So, for example, you might be a loyal player and you might help a mission fail because the mission specifies that you're going to get a specific amount of cubes of different colors if you help the mission fail, or all players are going to get that specific color. So you might want to make the mission fail just to get these colors, because even though you're a loyalist and you support the throne, you also have your own little agenda, which is very similar to Game of Thrones, where players or houses, even if they are loyal to the one who sits on the Iron Throne, they are also looking out for their own individual agendas. It's really fun. If you like social deduction games and big group games, this is definitely a game you got to look into. My number 4 Game of Thrones themed board game, Game of Thrones Oathbreaker. Now we move on to my number 3 Game of Thrones themed board game, and it is a Game of Thrones the board game. And this game here has lots of elements of classic games like Risk and diplomacy. There's an area control that takes place because the board consists of a map of Westeros. And it's a very nice looking board, really like the way it looks. And it has the lands of Westeros further divided into different particular regions and areas and cities. And players are basically trying to advance their troops and march their troops into these different areas. In particular, they're targeting key strategic areas. There's some areas that give you particular icons that provide resources that are very useful for you. So some of these locations have crowns, which help you with your power. It helps you generate more power. And power is a currency that you'll be using throughout the course of the game to bid or participate in an auction for the 3 different respective tracks. You also have your barrels here that represent your food. And this is a very important resource as well, because your army size depends on how many barrels you control, how many sources of food you control. And finally, you have these castles and strongholds, which are the most important locations of them all, because that's actually the name of the game. That's actually the objective of the game. The first player to control 7 strongholds and or castles will be the winner of the game. And each player starts, or each house starts, controlling 1 or 2 houses. And that's one of the neat things of the game, is that the game is asymmetric from the very beginning. Not only do you control a different house that has different characters available to you, but even your starting situation is different. Some players start the game, or some houses start the game with more resources as far as food is concerned. Others start the game with more strongholds, so they already start with a little bit of a head start. And as I mentioned earlier, there are 3 different tracks. You got your Iron Throne track, you've got your King's Court track, and you've got your military track. And basically each of these tracks grant you different privileges or advantages. If you, the higher you are on the Iron Throne track, the earlier you will be in the turn order sequence. If you are first, you will sit on the Iron Throne and you will break all ties as far as auctions are concerned. If you are number 1 on the Valyrian Steel track or the military track, then you are going to win all ties when it comes to combat. And finally, if you have the King's Court, that's going to allow you to place a few additional special tokens that other players cannot place. Because what's taking place in this game is an action, program action selection, where you have a bunch of tokens that represent your different actions, and you're going to start the round, or each round, by placing these tokens face down in every region that you control, or every region on which you have units. And then once all players have placed down their tokens face down, then simultaneously you will reveal all the tokens, and in turn order players are going to activate said tokens. Lots of things going on, lots of ways of players forming alliances. They can offer their military support to other people when they're being attacked by another house. The different cards that you play representing different characters from the houses, that is how you actually resolve combat. You're counting your strength on the board, comparing it to one another, but then on top of that, you're playing these different cards that not only add additional strength, but based on the character, they grant you an additional special ability. So trying to outsmart your opponent and trying to anticipate and speculate as to which cards they're going to pick is the heart of the game. Really cool. This game is a long game. This game easily takes 3, 4, maybe 5 hours to play. And it's one of the reasons why it's only number 3. Because from a thematic perspective, I do feel this game, I think it plays very well at 4, 5, and even 6 players. My number 3, Game of Thrones board game. Game of Thrones, the board game. And now we move on to my number 2. And for those of you who have been watching the channel for a while, you might know that Cosmic Encounter is one of my favorite board games of all time. So when they made a Game of Thrones theme re-implementation, a Game of Thrones, the Iron Throne, of course, it had a very good chance of succeeding with me. So Game of Thrones, the Iron Throne, as I mentioned, based off the classic popular Cosmic Encounter, but with a Game of Thrones theme, which I think is so apropos. Now, this game, just as Oathbreaker earlier, this game, the artwork is based on still shots from the actual TV series. It's one of only 2 games from my list that actually uses still shots instead of original artwork, and it's based kind of more on the series than on the novels. And each player is going to control a particular house. And just like in Cosmic Encounter, you have a variety of characters to control. So each house consists of 5 different characters. And you can choose which character you want to be your main character. And that character's is going to determine which special ability you have, a la Cosmic Encounter, for the rest of that game. But the other characters are useful too. You're going to have 4 other characters, and they're going to be depicted by these circular discs here, and they basically represent the equivalent of your planets in Cosmic Encounter. However, this game is much different because these characters here, they actually get crowns, which represent their power. And whenever they are defeated, they do not lose all of their power, all their crowns. They only lose half of their crowns rounded up. So they can actually partake in a couple of battles before they're eliminated. Once they lose all power, however, they will die and they'll be gone. But the interesting thing in this game is it introduces lots of unique differences from Cosmic Encounter as far as rules and gameplay is concerned. And I'm not going to say that I necessarily prefer all of the changes, but I do find them to be neat alternatives. The biggest change in this game is that instead of having a communal deck from which players will draw a starting hand of 8 cards, in this game, each player has their own unique individual deck. Well, I shouldn't say unique, but they have their own deck to themselves. So you do not have to wonder and speculate as to who is going to have which card versus which other card. Everybody has the same cards. It's all a matter of which cards you'll deal in your current hand and when you'll get these other cards. For example, in Cosmic Encounter, there's one card that's more powerful than all other cards. It's your 40 attack card. And there's only one copy of that card. In this game, the highest valued card is a 20. So first of all, the discrepancy and the range is much more contained. And second of all, every player has a 20 card. So you got to think about playing your 20 because it's not necessarily a guarantee that you'll beat your opponent because they might have their 20 in hand as well. And you're always going to have 6 cards available to you because you're always going to have a hand of 5, which you consistently replenish. And whenever you engage in a encounter, you're always going to draw a card at the beginning of that turn. So you're always going to have 6 cards, if not more, available to you. Unlike Cosmic Encounter, where you start to run out of cards and have fewer choices left available to you. So I find that to be really cool. You also have these character cards in this game that not only add an element of intrigue and politics of the game, because you could actually capture these cards and they're referred to as hostages, and you can actually freely give your hostages back to your opponents, or you can torture them, which give you additional in-game benefits. But these character cards actually have special abilities that if you play them, as long as your character is the one currently involved in that encounter, as I mentioned, all the circular discs, the equivalent of your planets in Cosmic Encounter, each of them correspond to a particular character in your current house. And if that character is available, then you can play that character's card on that turn and trigger some special action. Lots of cool things to factor in if you like Cosmic Encounter and you like a Game of Thrones theme and you haven't played Iron Throne. That's something you got to get to. My number 2 Game of Thrones board game, Game of Thrones Iron Throne. And we finally make it to my number 1, my absolute favorite Game of Thrones themed board game, and that is A Game of Thrones, The Living Card Game by Nate French and Eric Lang. And this is the 2nd edition, and I own 2 boxes here for more deck construction, deck customization options. This game here, the base game can play 2 to 4 players. If you get 2 copies of the game, you can play all the way up to 6. And this game, besides having the fun, cool, tactical flavor of lots of these living card games from the Fantasy Flight catalog, this game is the only LCG that allows for more than 2 players competitively. You have a competitive game here, it's fully competitive, but you can have all the way up to 4 or 6 players depending on how many copies of the base game you have. And it's so cool because you would think that having that many players can lead to people teaming up and bullying another player, but that's not necessarily the case because you have these title cards that correspond to the different titles within the small council. You get your Master of Whispers and your Master of Ships and your Master of Coin, and each player at the beginning of the round, the players in turn order are going to secretly draft one of these characters. There's a little bit of hidden character selection. And these different title cards, not only are they going to grant them particular bonuses and benefits, thematic benefits corresponding to their title, but that card is going to serve as a direction as to which enemies you want to target, which enemies you cannot fight with that round. So it becomes a little bit kind of like a game of Citadels, where you're trying to pick a character based on what your opponents, your enemies, you think they might pick. So you might want to pick a particular role to make sure that someone around the table that's been aiming for you all game long will not be able to mess with you that round. So I find that to be a really cool game within the game. But besides that, all of the different cards representing the different characters among the houses, they feel so thematic. What they do corresponds to what you know about that character, what you love about that character, perhaps even what you hate about the character. Also, at the beginning of each round, you're playing these plot cards. Each player is going to play these plot cards. And these plot cards not only determine how much money you're going to have for that round, you're not going to have the same money for each round going forward, and money is not cumulative. You do not save it for a future round. Not only is it going to determine how much money you make, it's also going to determine your initiative. It's going to determine how the turn order carries out for that particular round. And on top of it all, it's usually going to trigger a unique special effect that's either positive to all players, detrimental to all players. Maybe it's good for you. And it's really cool and really thematic how these correspond to different plot lines from the actual novels and the TV show. I just find it to be such a fun, immersive experience, and at the same time, a very strategic and tactical game. My number 1 Game of Thrones board game Game of Thrones, the living card game. And that's it for today's video, folks. Thank you so much for joining us here at When Harry Met Board Games. Please comment down below and tell me what you think about this particular set of 5 games. Are you a fan of A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones? Which of these games are you most interested in? What is your favorite Game of Thrones board game? Perhaps it's a game that I didn't even cover on today's list. I'm interested in reading what you guys have to say. This is Harry saying take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.